What would you do if you saved up for years to buy your dream cabin and the very first time you went out there with your kids, your youngest child started saying that they were hearing and seeing strange things outside the cabin at night? Would you listen to your child or would you just brush it off as being just a child's imagination? In 2014, one couple went through this exact situation. And if you're a parent, this story is definitely going to hit you a lot harder than if you do not have kids. But before we get into today's encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you'd like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you're out at your cabin in the woods, keep that subscribe button within arm's reach so that you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounters. On paper, Ryan and Claire did not seem like a very likely couple. Ryan had grown up in the largest city in Canada called Toronto, where Claire grew up in a smaller city, a small town up in northwestern Ontario at the northern shores of Lake of the Woods called Kenora. Now, Kenora, compared to Toronto, has a population of only about 15,000 people. Ryan and Claire met through their church in their late teens, and in their early 20s, they ended up getting married. And where they decided to move so that they could start their life together, start a family, was Claire's hometown of Kenora. Having grown up in Toronto, Ryan was very accustomed to the real hustle and bustle of big city life. So when he moved to Kenora, he was really not sure how he was going to fit in. But very shortly after moving there, he really started to fall in love with the area. See, Kenora, again, is located up at the northern shore of Lake of the Woods, which is one of the best lakes in pretty much all of Canada for walleye, northern pike, muskie, and lake trout fishing. And it's located in an area that a lot of people consider to be some of the most pristine cabin country in all of Canada as well. It's located in the Canadian Shield. It's surrounded by pretty much countless lakes, and it's just pretty much an absolute paradise. So Ryan really found himself loving this area shortly after he moved there. 6 years later, the couple, they had two children. One was just about to turn 5, the other was just about to turn 3. And the two of them, they really wanted some form of an escape for their family, just to basically get away from their everyday lives and just get away from people in general. Even though they were living in Kenora, which is a very small town, in the summertime, that population of 15,000 can rise to 80, 90,000 people because of all the different cottage communities in the area. So when they started looking for a cabin, they wanted one that was just way off the beaten path, as far away from people as possible. So they spent a couple of months looking through classifieds, looking online, and they found a property that they thought would be absolutely perfect for what they were looking for. It was located on the shores of Croduck Lake out in Western Ontario, and it was located off the main gravel road with a single drive that was about 2 miles to where this cabin would be located. After going to look at the property, both of them instantly fell in love with it, and they were like, okay, we need to get this cabin. So they put an offer in, they ended up getting the cabin, and then for several weeks after, they spent every evening making the hour drive from Kenora out to the cabin, pretty much just to do work on the place, to get it ready for their own family. Once the cabin was pretty much ready to go, Claire ended up going out to the cabin with the kids. Now, she was a stay-at-home mom. However, Ryan had a couple of weeks vacation coming up, but Claire really wanted to get the jump on getting out there before him. Again, because she was more of the outdoorsy person, she figured if she got out there before Ryan got out there, she could do a little bit more work to the place so that when he got out there, their vacation could be pretty much perfect. Late on the Tuesday afternoon, she loaded the kids up in the family minivan, then she made the drive out to the property. When she was going down that 2-mile section of driveway, she was not able to get all the way up to the cabin. The last 100 yards was very steep, very uneven, and the minivan just did not have the ground clearance to make it that last 100 yards. So she had to park the minivan at the bottom of this rocky hill, and then from there she had to carry the kids and all the gear up to the cabin. Once she had the kids and all her stuff up in the cabin, she made the kids some dinner. Her and her kids sat around for a little while by a fire. She read them some nighttime stories, put them to bed, and then she settled in for the evening as well. Laying in bed that night, Claire thought for sure she was going to have a hard time falling asleep because this would be the first night that she was spending in the cabin. Because again, up until this point, every single trip out here had been from Kenora to the cabin to do work and then back again. Nobody had spent a night in the cabin since they had bought it. However, she very quickly drifted off into a very deep sleep. However, sometime in the middle of the night, she was quickly awoken, just basically startled awake. She found herself quickly sitting up in her bed and just listening to what was going on around her. And she heard her 5-year-old calling from the other room on the other side of the wall, saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." So she called out to her 5-year-old, asking what was wrong, and her 5-year-old just said, "Daddy's outside." This completely puzzled Claire because she's like, "No, Daddy's not outside. Daddy's back at home." So she told her daughter, she said, "Daddy's not outside. Daddy's back at home." And then her 5-year-old said, "No, Daddy's at my window. He's at my window. He wants me to open the door." So Claire at this point's like, what the hell is going on? So she quickly got up out of bed, made her way out of the room, down the hall, and into her daughter's room. And her daughter was standing on the bed, looking out the window of the cabin, looking towards the bush line. And she was pointing, going, "There's Daddy, there's Daddy." So Claire's like, "Where?" And she's like, "Right there in the trees." So Claire goes up to the window, looks out, and she can't see anything at all. So at this point, she's thinking that, okay, her daughter had some type of a dream. She must have dreamt that Ryan's standing in the bush. So she tried to reassure her daughter that Daddy's not outside in the woods, that Daddy's back at home. She laid her down in bed, sat with her for a while till she fell asleep, and then she went back to her own room and went to bed. The next morning, when she got up and she was giving the kids breakfast, she ended up asking her 5-year-old again, like, "What happened last night? You kept saying you saw Daddy outside, but when Mommy looked out the window, I couldn't see anything." And her 5-year-old said, "No, Daddy was knocking on my window and he wanted me to open the door." And Claire's like, "Sweetheart, Daddy's not out here. Daddy's at home. He's not going to be out here for a few more days." But her 5-year-old was being very adamant that she saw her dad knocking on the window, asking her to open the door. Claire was not too sure what to make of this, but she just kind of brushed it off as, Kate, she's just a young child. It's just her imagination. She's having a difficulty processing dreams and reality. And she's like, it's no big deal. She just had a dream. It's nothing to worry about. That day, she pretty much just did some work around the property. That evening, again, she made her kids some dinner, read them some stories, put them to bed, and then she settled in for the night as well. And just like the night before, in the middle of the night, she was quickly startled awake to her 5-year-old again saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." So Claire let out a sigh, figuring, great, here we go again, got up, made her way out of the room, down the hall, into her daughter's room, and again, her daughter was standing on the bed, pointing out that window, saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." So Claire again walked over to the bed, looked out that window, saw absolutely nothing. So she told her daughter, "Sweetheart, we went over this yesterday and this morning. Daddy's at home. You're just having dreams. Just go back to sleep and everything will be okay." So she put her daughter back down, waited for her to fall asleep, went back to her room, and went to bed for the night. And again, the next morning, she asked her daughter again. She said, "Sweetheart, again, last night you were saying Daddy was outside, and he wasn't. I've told you Daddy's at home." And her daughter again said, "No, Daddy was knocking on my window and wanted me to let him in." And Claire again was just like, okay, this is just a 5-year-old's imagination. Again, she's having a hard time differentiating dreams from reality. So she's like, okay, hopefully this is just because this is a new place. She hasn't spent the night here before. This is the first time she spent away from her dad. Hopefully tonight will be better. So that day again, she brought the kids outside this time. She did some work around the property. That night, same routine as the night before. Had dinner, read some stories, put the kids to bed. And that night, in the middle of the night, again, she was startled awake, but this time it wasn't her 5 year old yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." It was her 5 year old just completely screaming in terror, yelling, "Daddy!" So she quickly sat up, ran out of her room into her daughter's room, and this time, instead of standing on the bed pointing out that window, her daughter was curled up in the fetal position up against the wall on top of her pillow, holding her blanket, crying, saying, "Mean daddy's outside, mean daddy's outside." Claire had no idea what to make of this. She had no idea why her daughter, one, thought that her dad was outside and why she thought her dad was being mean. So she's trying to comfort her daughter and she says, "Sweetheart, like, what's going on?" And her daughter said that her dad was at the window, knocking on it again, telling her to let him in, and that if she did not let him in, that he was going to hurt her. Claire at this point's like, okay, like there's something not right going on, but again was like, this is most likely just her having a hard time because this is the first few nights in this cabin. It's a new place. She's just having a hard time really picking what's dream and what's reality. So she tried to calm her daughter down, finally got her to go back to sleep, and then she made her way out of her daughter's room. But this time, instead of going back to her room, she made her way into the living room and stood there looking out the living room window that looked at that same bush line. At this point, she was trying to figure out if there was anything outside. She thought, maybe there's an owl up in the tree. Maybe that's what my daughter's hearing, and she just doesn't know what to make of this thing, as she just is associating it with her father. So she stood there for quite a while looking out the window. She didn't see anything, so she ended up making her way back to her room, settled back down in her bed. The next morning she got up and again she asked her daughter, like, what happened the night before? And her daughter said that mean daddy was at the window getting mad at her and saying that he was going to hurt her. So Claire again was like, okay, something's not right here, but, more than likely it's her having bad dreams and just not processing what she's dreaming and what's real. So that afternoon, she went outside to go cut some wood, and this time she decided she was going to leave the 2-year-old in the cabin. She was going to bring her 5-year-old out with her and just kind of keep her outside, let her play. Figured, if she burns off more energy, maybe she'll sleep a little bit better tonight. So as she's chopping wood, her 5-year-old's playing around in the yard, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner of her eye, she sees her 5-year-old making her way towards that bush line. So she kind of stops with the axe as she's just standing there looking at her child, and she sees her child walk up towards the trees, stop right at that bush line, and then start waving into the trees. At this point, Claire's like, okay, like there's something definitely not right going on out here. So she put her axe down and quickly ran over to her daughter, grabbed her, and said, "Honey, what are you waving at?" And her daughter pointed into the woods, saying, "Daddy, he's over there. He's behind that tree." And she's like, "Hi, Daddy. Hi, Daddy." And Claire's looking into the trees, not seeing anything, and she's just like, what in the hell is happening here? Like, what's wrong with my daughter? Like, is she seeing something? Like, what's going on? And so Claire's standing there holding her daughter, looking into the trees, when all of a sudden she just sees this dark figure kind of move from behind the tree, looking towards them, and then back behind the tree again. Claire at this point's like, holy, like there is actually somebody out there and they're trying to lure my child into the woods. And she's like, is this person who's in the woods the same person knocking on her window telling her to let her in? So at this point she's absolutely terrified. So she scoops up her daughter, runs inside the cabin, locks the door, and then she's standing there holding her daughter in the kitchen, and she's trying to figure out what she's going to do next, because there's somebody in the woods that's now been trying to lure her child into the woods and been knocking on the window every night. And her vehicle's 150 yards away, and she would have to get her 5-year-old plus her 2-year-old from the cabin down to the minivan to get out of there. So she's standing there trying to plan her next move, and she is just completely lost at what she should be doing. She knew that later in the day her husband would be out there, but she didn't know if this person outside would be able to get into the cabin, and if they did wait for her husband to come out, if something bad would happen in that meantime. At this point, she figured it was just way too much of a risk to bring the kids from the cabin down to the van. So she thought that her best bet would be just to stay in the cabin and wait for Ryan to get there. So she scooped her kids up, she put her kids in her own room, then she grabbed the biggest knife that she could find in the knife block along with the fireplace poker. She went into the room, she closed the door, locked it, and then she spent some time trying to calm her 5-year-old down. She figured if she could calm her down, maybe it would help calm herself down as well. However, as she was trying to calm her daughter down, all of a sudden from outside of her own window, she heard Ryan's voice calling to her daughter. At this point, she's like, awesome, he's here early. So she got up, moved to the window, looked outside, but again, she saw absolutely nothing. All she could just see was the trees. So she stood there for a second, looking out into the bush, and again, she heard Ryan's voice calling to her daughter. But this time, because she was paying attention, she noticed that this voice sounded a little bit off. It sounded a lot like Ryan, but it just did not sound exactly like him. At this point, she's like, okay, something is not right, and that voice outside is not my husband's. So she moved away from the window, she sat down on the ground, and it took pretty much everything she had to stop herself from just completely breaking down. For the next couple of hours, she would periodically hear that voice calling to her daughter, calling to herself, and she would hear knocking on the various windows all around the cabin. And at one point, she heard the front doorknob being turned, sounded like somebody was pushing up against the door. And a couple of hours later, she heard the sound of her husband's truck coming up that hill, and she was instantly filled with just a feeling of relief. She quickly scooped up her kids, ran out of the cabin directly to Ryan's truck. She more or less almost threw her kids onto the back seat, jumped in the passenger side, and just looked at Ryan and said, "We have to go. We are not staying here. Go, go, go." Ryan had no idea what was going on, but he knew that his wife had grown up pretty much in this area, and she was very used to everything out of the woods. And if she was freaking out this bad, that something was definitely wrong and he should really be listening to her. So he put his truck in reverse, back down that hill, stopped beside the SUV, and was more or less expecting her to get out and get into the SUV, and she just absolutely refused to get out of the truck. And she said, "No, we're not taking the SUV. We'll come back for that. Just go. I want to get home. Go, go, go." So Ryan put the truck in drive, ended up driving back to Kenora. Once they got back to Kenora, Ryan was asking her, like, what happened? So she told him the entire story of what happened. And the two of them started to question their 5-year-old, like, what did you see? Like, you said that daddy was outside in the window. Like, what did you see? And she could not quite describe exactly what she saw, just that it looked like daddy was outside and she could hear daddy's voice and he was knocking on the window. Now, in order for that to be possible, if Ryan was out there, he would have had to have been standing pretty much on like the second or third rung of a ladder, so 2 or 3 feet up off the ground, to be able to knock on the window, let alone have his face looking in this window. So they really have no idea what or who this was at their cabin, but they decided, you know what, something's going on out at this property. So they decided that they were going to sell it, but they really did not want to sell it at the same time because they had no idea what they were dealing with on this property. And they really could not stomach the thought of another family more or less sinking their life savings into this place and going through the same type of thing. And they thought, if they did sell it to another family, if something happened to someone, they would just never be able to forgive themselves. So they ended up keeping this property, but they've only ever gone back out the one time, pretty much just to get their SUV, and they have not been back out since. Well, that's it for today's encounter. Let me know in the comments below what you think this entity was. My personal thoughts when I was told this story was that this sounds a lot like a skinwalker, just because it did kind of appear to their daughter to look like Ryan. But I really want to know your thoughts on this. But as always, thanks for joining us. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.